Welcome back to Billionaire Files. As we mentioned in our previous video, we promised to bring you every new update related to this case.
And today, we're back with exactly that. A new update has just come out, and in this video, we're going to break it down clearly and explain what it actually means. So let's get started. What you're about to hear is not a conspiracy theory. It's not internet gossip, and it's not speculation built on imagination. This story is based on official court records, government documents, and testimonies that were ignored for years. Yet somehow, almost no one talks about it the way it deserves. Jeffrey Epstein was not just a criminal. He was a system failure. A failure so deep that it exposed how power, money, and influence can quietly override justice inside a modern democracy. Before we talk about the files, before we talk about the names, we need to understand one thing clearly. Epstein did not operate alone, and that is exactly why this case became dangerous. For decades, Jeffrey Epstein moved freely among the world's most powerful people: billionaires, politicians, royal figures, celebrities, corporate elites, people who shape laws, markets, and narratives. And despite repeated warnings, despite multiple accusations, despite clear red flags, he was protected. The question is not, how did Epstein commit these crimes? The real question is, who made it possible for him to keep going? The Epstein Files exist because the public refused to let this story die quietly. They are not a single document. They are a massive collection of court filings, witness testimonies, flight logs, emails, depositions, sealed exhibits. Together, they form a disturbing picture of how deeply Epstein was connected. For years, these files were hidden. Some were sealed by courts. Others were locked behind legal technicalities. Many were heavily redacted. Entire names removed. Entire pages blacked out. Not to protect victims, but to protect reputations. Journalists demanded transparency. Victims demanded justice, lawmakers promised accountability, and still the files stayed buried. Only after intense public pressure did the system begin to crack. New laws were passed, courts were forced to unseal records, and slowly, very slowly, the Epstein Files began to surface. Over 1 million pages of material have now been released, and every release raised more questions than answers. What immediately stood out was not just the volume of documents, it was the pattern. Certain names appeared again and again, certain locations repeated, certain travel routes matched timelines from testimonies. This was not random, this was organized. Flight logs revealed frequent trips on Epstein's private aircraft. These were not commercial flights. There were no public passenger lists, no security screening, no accountability. Only now, years later, are these records being examined. Victims described being trafficked across state lines, across borders, transported to private properties where normal laws didn't seem to apply. And every time someone tried to speak up, they were ignored. In 2008, Epstein was arrested. This should have been the end. The evidence was overwhelming. The accusations were serious. The victims were credible. But what happened next shocked legal experts. Epstein received one of the most controversial plea deals in modern legal history. A deal so lenient that it effectively protected not only him, but also any potential co-conspirators. He served minimal time, he retained wealth, he retained influence, and he walked free. This was the moment the system revealed its weakness, because justice was not blind, justice was negotiable. After his release, Epstein returned to the same lifestyle, same connections, same power circles, same private travel, as if nothing had happened. Victims continued to come forward, but now they weren't just fighting Epstein, they were fighting silence, intimidation, legal pressure, and fear. Fear is powerful when it's backed by money. Fear is stronger when it's backed by influence, and fear becomes absolute when the system itself looks away. For years, Epstein's name surfaced quietly in lawsuits, depositions, and testimonies, but the media rarely connected the dots until it became impossible to ignore. In 2019, Epstein was arrested again. This time, the charges were federal. This time, there was no plea deal, and this time, the spotlight was global. He was placed in a high-security jail on suicide watch. The world watched closely because Epstein alive meant answers. Epstein alive meant names. Epstein alive meant accountability. And then Jeffrey Epstein was found dead inside his cell. Authorities ruled it a suicide, but almost immediately things didn't add up. Security cameras malfunctioned. Guards failed to follow protocol. Critical footage disappeared. And medical experts questioned the injuries, and the timing could not be worse. With Epstein dead, a central figure was gone, a man who could confirm or deny everything, a man who could expose an entire network. This is where the Epstein Files become more than documents. They become evidence of a system scrambling to control damage. Names were redacted, timelines blurred, responsibility diluted, and once again, the powerful seemed insulated. But the public did not forget, and that pressure is what brings us here. Because the Epstein Files are not about one criminal. They are about how power protects itself, and this is only the beginning. By the time the Epstein Files began surfacing, one thing was already clear. This case was never going to be simple, because when power is involved, truth rarely comes out clean. As documents were unsealed, people expected shocking revelations. What they didn't expect was how normalized everything looked. Not chaos, not secrecy in the shadows, but routine. Meetings, flights, invitations, introductions, all documented, all recorded, all ignored for years. The files didn't scream scandal, they whispered familiarity. Certain names appeared once and never again, but other names appeared repeatedly. In flight logs, in contact lists, in witness testimonies, in depositions taken under oath, again and again and again. Now, appearing in a document does not automatically mean guilt. That distinction matters. But when the same individuals keep appearing across multiple records, across different years, across independent testimonies, patterns begin to form. And patterns demand investigation. Victims described being introduced to powerful individuals as if it were normal, as if exploitation was part of a system. Some described being flown to private properties. Others spoke about being present during gatherings where age, consent, and legality seemed irrelevant. What stands out most is not just what victims said, it's what happened after they said it. Many victims reported their abuse years before Epstein's final arrest. Some went to the police, some went to lawyers, some went to the media, and yet, nothing happened. Cases stalled, complaints disappeared, investigations were quietly dropped, not because evidence was weak, but because influence was strong. The Epstein Files reveal how often prosecutors hesitated, how often agencies deferred, how often responsibility was passed from one office to another until no one was accountable. And then there's the media. Mainstream coverage existed, but it was fragmented. Stories focused on Epstein himself, rarely on the network around him, rarely on the system that allowed him to operate, rarely on the unanswered questions. Why? Because challenging power comes with consequences. Access gets cut, careers get stalled, legal threats appear, and silence becomes convenient. Inside the files, there are entire sections that remain heavily redacted. Not just personal addresses, not just phone numbers, but names, full names, redacted years after investigations were supposedly closed. If justice had already been served, why hide identities? If no crimes were committed, why protect reputations? Redaction is not neutral. It is a choice about who deserves privacy and who doesn't. Victims' names were often public, but powerful individuals' names were hidden. That contrast speaks volumes. Some witnesses described being pressured to stay quiet. Others reported settlement offers paired with strict non-disclosure agreements. Speak and face endless legal battles. Stay silent and receive protection. This is how systems control damage, not with force, but with fatigue. By the time many victims were heard, years had passed. Evidence was lost. Memories faded. Statutes of limitation expired. Justice delayed became justice denied. The files also reveal how Epstein used legitimacy as camouflage. University connections, charitable foundations, advisory roles, all designed to create credibility, to make accusations seem unbelievable. He wasn't just wealthy, he was validated, and validation is powerful. The more connected Epstein became, the harder it was for outsiders to question him, because questioning Epstein meant questioning everyone around him, and that was dangerous. Law enforcement agencies often claimed jurisdictional confusion, state versus federal, domestic versus international. But confusion became an excuse, and excuses became policy. Even after Epstein's second arrest, focus remained narrow. Epstein was the villain. The network stayed vague. But the files refuse to stay vague. They show relationships, introductions, timelines that overlap with victim accounts. Some individuals claimed they didn't know. Others claimed they don't remember. Some denied ever meeting Epstein despite documented evidence, and every denial added another layer to the mystery. What makes the Epstein files so disturbing is not that they provide all answers. It's that they reveal how many answers were never pursued. This wasn't a lack of resources. This wasn't incompetence. This was selective enforcement. When ordinary people commit crimes, systems move quickly. When powerful people are involved, systems slow down. Paperwork multiplies, committees form, processes drag on, until attention fades. And that may be the most dangerous weapon of all: time. The Epstein files show us how accountability can be delayed until it becomes optional, how truth can be fragmented until it loses impact, how outrage can be managed until it becomes background noise. But the files also show something else. They show courage. Victims who refused to stay silent. Journalists who kept digging. Citizens who kept demanding transparency. Because without pressure, these documents would still be sealed. Without persistence, names would remain hidden. Without resistance, the story would end with Epstein alone. But Epstein was never alone. And that reality is exactly what makes this case so uncomfortable. Because if this could happen here, with this much evidence, with this many warnings, then the question isn't how did it happen? The real question is, how often does it happen without anyone noticing? And that brings us to the final chapter. By the time Jeffrey Epstein died, the most dangerous phase of this case had already begun. Not because justice was served, but because justice was interrupted. On paper, the story ends simply. Jeffrey Epstein was found dead inside his jail cell. Authorities ruled it a suicide. Case closed.
But real life is rarely that clean, especially when the stakes are this high. Epstein was one of the most valuable witnesses in modern criminal history. He knew names, he knew locations, he knew timelines, and more importantly, he knew secrets. Secrets that could collapse reputations, secrets that could trigger investigations, secrets that could expose an entire system. Epstein alive meant accountability. Epstein alive meant consequences. And then suddenly, he wasn't. The official explanation was suicide, but almost immediately basic questions emerged, questions that were never fully answered. Why was Epstein removed from suicide watch? Why were cell checks skipped? Why did surveillance cameras malfunction at the exact moment they were needed most? In a facility designed to prevent precisely this outcome, protocol failed on multiple levels. Not one, not two, multiple. When failures stack up like that, they stop looking like accidents. They start looking like negligence, or something worse. Medical experts questioned the nature of Epstein's injuries. Independent analysis raised doubts about whether the physical evidence fully supported suicide. Yet no transparent, publicly accountable investigation was conducted. Instead, officials urged the public to move on, to accept the explanation, to stop asking questions. But asking questions is exactly what democracy demands. After Epstein's death, something strange happened. Momentum disappeared. Investigations slowed. Media coverage softened. Political urgency faded. The system exhaled. Because without Epstein, there was no central figure left to interrogate, no one to confront, no one to pressure. The Epstein Files continued to be released, but now without context, without urgency, without consequences. Names remained redacted, connections remained unexplored, responsibility remained diffuse. This is where the case reveals its darkest truth. Democracy didn't fail because files were hidden. Democracy failed because accountability stopped where power began. The Epstein Files show us a contradiction at the heart of modern society. On paper, everyone is equal under the law. In practice, some people are insulated by influence. When ordinary citizens commit crimes, systems move swiftly. When elites are implicated, systems hesitate. Delay becomes strategy. Silence becomes protection. Transparency exists, but only in controlled doses, enough to calm outrage, not enough to disrupt power. The Epstein Files prove that truth alone is not enough. Truth requires enforcement, and enforcement requires courage. Courage that institutions often lack when consequences reach upward. This case forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. Justice is not automatic. It must be demanded relentlessly. Without public pressure, these files would still be sealed. Without scrutiny, names would still be hidden. Without persistence, the story would have ended with Epstein alone, and that would have been convenient. Convenient for those who benefited from his silence, convenient for systems that avoided accountability, convenient for narratives that protect stability over truth. The Epstein Files do not tell us everything that happened. They tell us something worse. They show us how much was never pursued, how many warnings were ignored, how many victims were dismissed, how many opportunities for justice were deliberately avoided. This isn't just about Epstein. It's about what happens when power is allowed to police itself. Because when oversight disappears, abuse becomes inevitable, not exceptional. The most disturbing question isn't knowing whether Epstein was silenced. It's this: if he was, how many times has this happened before? And how many times will it happen again? The Epstein Files remain incomplete. Some truths may never surface, some names may never be revealed, some justice may never come. But what these files have already proven cannot be undone. They have exposed a system that bends for influence. They have exposed how justice can be delayed until it loses meaning. They have exposed how democracy can perform transparency without delivering accountability. And that should concern everyone. Because a system that protects power over people will eventually fail both. The Epstein Files are not closure. They are a warning that truth is fragile, that justice is conditional, and that silence is the most powerful shield of all. What happens next depends on one thing: whether the public continues to ask questions, or whether this story is allowed to fade. Because history shows us that power rarely confesses, it waits, and if we stop paying attention, it wins. If you found this update helpful, don't forget to like the video, share it with others so more people stay informed, and subscribe to the channel for more updates and deep dives like this. Thanks for watching.